My sermon on nourishing friendship and avoiding the friendship killers like gossip and slander generated a lot of questions. There is one video with about 9 questions on it, but there was one more that I want to address in a separate video because it is one of the most important questions that could be asked about this issue of gossip and slander. And that's the question of how leaders in a church should handle this issue. What are the protocols for leaders? So here is the question in its entirety. Regarding the thorns of gossip and slander, these are both forms of talking about someone with others. Please elaborate on how this relates to parents, pastors, and church leadership teams, those whose jobs are to oversee, lead, care, and care for people. Is correction or judging to be done by the one leader alone who received the information to avoid talking about someone behind their back? How much does the leadership of BG discuss congregants' faults/weaknesses/issues, either observed or shared? Is this form of talking about not considered gossip or slander because of the offices of the people doing the talking? Very perceptive and highly relevant question to this discussion. So let me just broad strokes here answer one of the most fearful implications of this issue of leaders talking about others' weaknesses and so forth. How much does the leadership of BG discuss congregants' faults, weaknesses, issues? We don't have time. This is a rare discussion, and it only comes up like in elder board meetings when there's some very serious issue or conflict or sin going on in the congregation. And so the board simply does not have time to sit around and talk about people. Our elder board meets about once a month, and we meet for about 2.5 hours mostly. We try to keep it at 2 hours, but we're rarely successful because there is so much business to conduct, the organizational issues, policy issues, and there a lot of these in our stage at the church right now. A lot of these have been sort of delayed for years or even decades sometimes, and with some of them we're plowing new ground here. So there's simply too much to talk about to sit around and evaluate people. So we don't have time. But that doesn't answer all of these questions. The questions go to what about when there are issues and you have to talk about it. So the key to this question and the way it is framed is that parents, pastors, and church leadership teams have a job to do. Their job is to oversee, lead, and care for people. And that is our job. And so that necessitates evaluating and measuring and asking questions about character, intent, and all of these kinds of things, because we are charged with evaluating those kinds of issues. It just occurs to me, there's Hebrews 13, I believe. And it's a passage, it's a phrase in a passage that really doesn't get a lot of attention, but it is quite relevant to this discussion. Let me see if I can find it here. Here it is. Okay. This is Hebrews 13:17. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls. Okay, that's heavy. It is what we do. Parents, it is what you do. You keep watch over the souls of your children. And we do that as those who will have to give an account. So church leaders have an accountability first to each other and to God. We shouldn't just assume that church leaders are accountable to God, and that's what that's referring to. They have to give account of their actions to each other. And the early church in particular had a pretty extensive authority structure for keeping account with leaders, and they used it. And much of the New Testament is written to that end. So this question is saying, okay, we've got this job. If we're church leaders, parents, pastors, whatever it may be, and we need to lead and care for people, that means we got to talk about the people. So how do we do that? So let's go first to the definition of gossip and slander. I think this definition is a little too broad in this question, that gossip and slander are talking about other people. No, that's not it. Gossip is talking about someone with a third party who does not have the right to hear this. They're not part of it. They have no role in it. It's not your spouse and you're talking about your child. It's not an elder who was in a meeting and you're talking about the outcome of that meeting. This is somebody who wasn't there, isn't part of it, and you need to vent and you need to tell them all of the stuff that's going on. That's gossip. It's when the third party does not have a right to hear any of this. Slander is inaccuracy. Whether they have a right to hear it or not, you're telling them things that aren't true about someone who was not present. So I want to operate with a definition of gossip and slander that's a little more focused than just talking about people behind their back. None of that lessens the burden of that this is a very serious issue. It doesn't alleviate the danger that leadership of churches can get caught up in gossip and slander. They can very easily fall into both of those things on the pretense that they have the authority to do it. So just because you're claiming the authority to do it doesn't mean you have it. So all I can do with this is sketch some of the protocols that I use. Let's think about, first of all, the zone of the normal, where you have meetings or you have discussions with individuals and maybe there are 3 people present. Maybe it's 2 elders and a couple of members of the congregation, and maybe that discussion raises some questions, or there's some behavior in that discussion that could cause real problems. So how are you going to talk about that? In that zone of the normal, I go, if I need to evaluate something like that, I go directly to the people who are directly involved. Not all church leaders need to know everything about every discussion. I go to the church leaders who are directly involved with that issue, know the people involved, and I seek out their counsel if I need to evaluate something that has happened in a meeting. And so a simpler way to put this is I keep the circle really small. but there is a circle. The question here is the correction or judging to be done by the one leader alone who received or saw the information? No, that's not wise. There are times when I feel enabled that it is wise to confront somebody alone about an issue like that. But when there's a disagreement and I need to craft some kind of response or craft some kind of approach on it, I always get counsel from a small circle of people who are directly involved. And that has saved me from enormous errors, misjudgments, and it has helped the church. So you want that kind of counsel to happen, but you want it in a small circle. Leadership that makes a habit of talking about everything without boundaries is unwise and undisciplined leadership. Keep the circles small within the realm of the normal. Now, sometimes there are really serious issues of sin. Slander is a very serious sin in the church, and you should know that the elders, biblically, are functioning as a kind of court to at some point to make a judgment call. Somebody said this about somebody else, and it's either true or it's not true. If it's true, it needs to be dealt with. If it's not true, then the person making that statement has to give an account. And now, we haven't had this particular issue come up in the church to where the elders have needed to do what is called church discipline with someone over the issue of slander. But it does come up in churches, and it will come up because we're a church full of people, and that's just what happens. So what about those cases? In those cases, the elders become a fact-finding team, and the protocols change where we need to know who said what, because reputations are on the line and reputation is being damaged, and there needs to be a response to that. So there are times when elders become kind of fact finders, and a committee of elders will go into an issue and do some interviews and figure out what's going on here. If that's happening, just know this: it's serious. It's a crisis in the church over sin of some form or another, and you're going to have to deal with it one direction or the other. So you say, "Ooh, that sounds terrible." You're right. It is terrible. Don't slander people. It has incredibly damaging consequences. Don't gossip about people. It is horrific what it does to the bond of the Holy Spirit and the love of Christ in the body of Christ. Know this, that I am not one of those pastors who backs away from this. Church leaders avoid these issues like the plague because they think that it's too costly to confront them. I'm telling you, it is way too costly to ignore them. And those costs go on for years, if not decades. They're sometimes generational. And so these are issues that are indeed horrific, extremely grave, and they are issues that require a very disciplined response from a team of mostly elders at that kind of level. So a couple of of principles here so far. We keep the circle small in the realm of the normal disagreements and normal arguments that people get into. In a crisis, we go into a mode of fact-finding, and that mode is we take a lot of initiative, or we're going to, if that ever happens, if and when. So, and we focus on fact-finding because you can't make a judgment without verifying the facts. So you have to have the facts before you can make any kind of judgment. It's our job to make a judgment in those kinds of crises, and so we will get the facts as best we are able. Backing up to the larger question here, is this form of talking about people not considered gossip or slander because of the offices of the people doing the talking? Not quite. It's not gossip and slander because used correctly, the people in these offices have a responsibility to deal with these issues. That's why they're there. And so that's why it's not gossip or slander. But, as I said before, that doesn't mean it couldn't become gossip or slander or loose talk. So some protocols. There are conversation places where this should take place, this kind of evaluation among leaders. And there are conversation places where it should not take place. This is not a hallway conversation. Hallways leak. People hear hallway conversations. And so, sometimes leaders kind of circle up in a place where a lot of people are around and passing by. And I've seen leaders do this and end up talking about very sensitive issues without really thinking through where they are doing it. So there needs to be real discipline and intentional protocols about where and how this happens. I always think through the method of conversation. Sometimes I will do it by email, but sometimes I will just call somebody up and say, hey, you have a few minutes because I need to ask you about something. And so I'll evaluate a situation with a leader by phone, or if I possibly can, meet with them face to face. It all depends on the sensitivity of the issue. If I need just a little bit of perspective and the other leader pretty much knows what's going on, I can get that perspective by email very quickly. But if it's more complicated than that, it might be a phone call or a direct face-to-face conversation in a secure spot. So all that to say, leaders can be just as guilty of gossip and slander as anyone else in the church. Their having an office does not give them the right to do any of these things willy-nilly. And it has to, when we have to talk about people, it has to be done in a very disciplined way. We don't have a free pass because of our office. Let me describe to you one more aspect of this, and that is prayer. Prayer, the ultimate grapevine in a church. You need to pray for so-and-so because ... Prayer meetings, the prayer page, the prayer chain that goes out by email, prayer requests that go to staff. I want you to understand that nothing goes onto the prayer chain. Nothing goes out and is published in our prayer page in the bulletin without permission. If we do not have explicit permission from the person who is concerned in the prayer request, we don't put it out. And that means we keep it among staff. Maybe somebody says, yeah, you can tell the elders, but I don't want this on the prayer page. There's any number of reasons why people don't want others to know about their health problems. Lots of reasons. There are lots of reasons why people want a little bit of time after a loved one passes away before they announce it publicly. There's all kinds of considerations. And so prayer becomes a pretense among leaders for all sorts of gossip. And so we have protocols about this that depend upon the explicit permission of the people directly involved in the matter. This means that we do not publish prayer requests on behalf of someone else. If you have an unsaved person you're praying for and you want the church to pray for that person, don't. That is not at all a good thing to put on the prayer page. Hey, pray for Johnny over here because he's not saved. And no, you don't want that kind of prayer request going out. It's not respectful. You want a much smaller circle on something like that. So these are some of the principal ways that gossip creeps into the leadership of the church and can become institutionalized in a church. And so those are some of my approaches on these very important matters. Thank you for that question. I look forward to seeing you all again on Sunday.